The smell of fresh coffee and old books filled my study that Tuesday morning when I sat down to write the letter that would cost me everything I had built over 4 decades. My hands trembled as I held the pen, not from age or weakness, but from the weight of what those words would unleash. 59 years of breathing, and 38 of those years spent knocking on doors, studying watchtowers until my eyes burned, and believing with every fiber of my being that I held the only truth worth living for. The letter sat before me like a confession at the gates of what I once called paradise. Outside my window in Manchester, the autumn rain painted grey streaks down the glass, and I could see the Kingdom Hall 3 blocks away where I had served as an elder for the past 12 years. The building looked smaller somehow, less significant than the monument it had been in my mind. My wife Sarah was at the Tuesday meeting right now, sitting in our usual spot 3rd row from the front, probably wondering why I had claimed a sudden migraine. She did not know yet. Nobody knew that I had been awake for 72 hours straight, reading, researching, and watching my entire reality crack like thin ice under heavy boots. The thing about truth is that once you see it, you cannot unsee it. Once the curtain pulls back, you cannot pretend the wizard is still all-powerful. I had stumbled upon something 3 months ago, something small and insignificant that most would overlook, but it had started an avalanche in my mind that buried everything I thought I knew. A single prophecy, a single date, a single lie repeated so many times it had become doctrine. My phone buzzed with messages from brothers in the congregation asking about tonight's elder meeting. They trusted me. They looked up to me. Brother William, they called me, the one who always had the right scripture, the perfect counsel, the unwavering faith. But I was neither brother nor unwavering anymore. This is the story of how I lost everything and found myself. This is the story of the exodus nobody talks about, the silent flood of people walking away from the only family they have ever known. This is my story, but it could be yours too. I need you to understand something before we go further into this account. What I am about to share with you is not motivated by bitterness or revenge or some personal vendetta against individuals. The people in my congregation were good people, sincere people, people who genuinely believed they were serving God in the purest way possible. My wife still is one of those people. My daughter, my son-in-law, my 3 grandchildren, they are all still inside, still believing, still waiting for Armageddon to vindicate their choices. When I walked away, I left them behind, and that pain sits in my chest like a stone I cannot swallow. But truth matters more than comfort. Truth matters more than the warm feeling of belonging, more than the security of having all your answers prepackaged and delivered every Sunday morning. I spent decades of my life teaching people that we had the truth, capital T, the exclusive pathway to salvation, and that everyone outside our organization was walking blindly toward destruction. I told parents to shun their children. I told families to break apart over doctrine. I enforced rules that destroyed lives, and I did it all while believing I was showing love. The cognitive dissonance nearly killed me. This is not an exaggeration. There were nights after I started questioning where I stood at the edge of the railway bridge near my house, watching the trains pass below, and thinking how easy it would be to just step forward. The pain of knowing you have wasted your entire adult life on a beautiful lie, the agony of realizing you hurt people in the name of that lie, it becomes unbearable. But I am still here, and I am telling this story because someone out there needs to hear it. Someone out there is where I was 3 months ago, feeling the first cracks in their certainty, terrified of what happens next. Before we continue, I want to ask you to do something for me. If this story resonates with you, if you see yourself or someone you love in these words, leave a comment below telling me what city you are watching from. Let me know I am not alone in this. Hit that subscribe button because I have more to share, more stories from others who walked this same painful path. And if you are still inside the organization and this video somehow reached you, please, I beg you, give me just 30 more minutes of your time. Click that like button so others can find this testimony. What I have to tell you might save your life, or at least save you years of suffering I cannot get back. Now let me take you back to where this all started, to the moment the first domino fell. The Henderson family moved into the territory in late June, and I was assigned to conduct their Bible study every Thursday evening at 7. Robert Henderson was a mechanic, grease under his fingernails even after scrubbing, and his wife Margaret worked night shifts at the hospital as a nurse. They had 2 teenage boys who looked at me with the suspicion teenagers reserve for anyone over 30 trying to teach them anything. But the Hendersons were hungry for meaning, for structure, for answers to questions that had haunted them since their youngest son died in a car accident 5 years prior. I loved conducting Bible studies. There was something pure about watching people discover what I believed were divine truths, seeing their faces light up when a scripture seemed to answer a question they had carried for years. The Hendersons were model students, never missing a session, underlining their publications, asking thoughtful questions. Margaret especially had this way of tilting her head when something confused her, really thinking through the implications before accepting anything I taught. During our 8th session, we were studying the prophecy about 1914, the cornerstone of witness theology, the calculation that Jesus returned invisibly that year and appointed the faithful and discreet slave to dispense food at the proper time. I had taught this lesson hundreds of times over the decades. I could recite the explanation in my sleep. 607 BCE plus 2,520 years equals 1914 CE. The 7 times from Daniel's prophecy. The Gentile times ending. The beginning of Christ's heavenly rule. It all fit together beautifully, mathematically, perfectly. But Margaret asked a question that Thursday that nobody had ever asked me before. She said, her voice small and uncertain, that she had been doing some additional research because she wanted to understand it fully. She had discovered that historians and archaeologists universally agreed that Jerusalem fell to Babylon in 586 or 587 BCE, not 607 BCE like our publications claimed. She showed me printouts from university websites, from scholarly journals, from archaeological findings. She was not trying to be rebellious. She genuinely wanted to understand why there was this 20-year discrepancy. I gave her the standard response we were trained to give. I told her that worldly scholars were influenced by Satan's system, that they had agendas and biases, that we should trust the faithful and discreet slave who had access to better research and divine guidance. I pulled out our publication that addressed this very issue, the one that explained why we held to 607 despite the historical consensus. I watched her nod slowly, accepting my explanation, but that tilt of her head was different this time. There was doubt there, small and quiet, but present. That night I could not sleep. Margaret's question kept circling in my mind like a vulture. I had never actually examined the evidence for 607 myself. I had simply accepted it because the organization taught it, because it was in the publications, because questioning it seemed disloyal. But I was an elder. I was responsible for teaching people truth. Should I not be absolutely certain of what I was teaching? Should I not be able to defend it with actual evidence rather than just appeals to authority? I got out of bed at 2 in the morning and went down to my study. I told myself I would spend an hour looking into this, just to satisfy my own curiosity, just to be better equipped to help students like Margaret who wanted deeper understanding. I opened my laptop and started searching. Archaeological evidence for the fall of Jerusalem. Babylonian chronology. Neo-Babylonian records. Astronomical diaries. Business tablets dated to specific reigns. What I found in that hour, and then in the 3 hours after that, and then in the sleepless days that followed, shattered something fundamental inside me. Every single piece of archaeological evidence, every astronomical calculation, every historical document from that period, they all pointed to the same dates. 586 or 587 BCE. Not 607. Not even close to 607. The evidence was not ambiguous or open to interpretation. It was as clear as DNA evidence in a criminal trial. But without 607, the entire calculation collapsed. Without 607, there was number 1914. Without 1914, there was no invisible return of Christ that year. Without that invisible return, there was no appointment of the faithful and discreet slave. Without that appointment, there was no divine authority behind the governing body. The whole structure, the entire theological framework I had built my life upon, it rested on a date that was demonstrably, provably, historically wrong. I sat in my study as dawn broke over Manchester, my coffee cold and untouched, my eyes burning from screen glare, and I felt something inside me that I had never felt before in relation to the organization. Fear. not the reverent fear of God that we talked about in meetings. This was the primal fear of realizing you are standing on ground that is not solid, that you have been walking across thin ice thinking it was granite. The rational part of my brain tried to find explanations. Perhaps the scholars were wrong. Perhaps there was some evidence I was missing. Perhaps Satan really was manipulating archaeological findings somehow. But the more I researched, the more I realized how desperate these explanations were. The organization's defense of 607 relied on dismissing mountains of evidence and clinging to interpretations of ancient texts that no actual scholar of ancient languages and history accepted. I did something then that I had never done in 38 years as a witness. I allowed myself to think the unthinkable thought. What if they were wrong? Not wrong about some minor detail or some adjustment to understanding that would be corrected in new light. What if they were fundamentally, foundationally wrong? And if they were wrong about this, what else were they wrong about? I became a man possessed by questions I had suppressed for nearly 4 decades. Every spare moment I had was spent researching, reading, digging through the organization's own past publications, comparing what they taught now with what they taught 20, 30, 50 years ago. I used private browsing modes on my laptop. I cleared my history obsessively. I felt like a criminal in my own home, hiding my investigation from my wife, from my fellow elders, from everyone who trusted me. The blood transfusion doctrine was the next pillar to crumble. I had counseled parents to refuse blood for their children. I had sat in hospital rooms with families facing impossible choices, and I had reinforced the teaching that accepting blood meant losing your relationship with God, losing your hope of resurrection, choosing temporary life over eternal life. I had believed with absolute certainty that this was God's law, unchanging and non-negotiable. But when I examined the history of this teaching, I discovered it only became official doctrine in 1945. Before that, the organization had no problem with blood transfusions. I found publications from the 1920s where they were not even mentioned. The scripture in Acts that we based everything on, the command to abstain from blood, was given to first-century Christians in the context of not eating blood in food, not in the context of medical treatment that would not be invented for another 19 centuries. We were taking a dietary law and applying it to medicine in a way that cost lives. I read stories online, testimonies from former witnesses, that I would have dismissed as apostate lies just weeks earlier. But now I read them with new eyes. Parents who lost children because they refused blood, only to watch the organization change the rules years later to allow blood fractions. The arbitrary nature of what fractions were acceptable kept changing. Hemoglobin was once forbidden, then allowed. The organization split blood into 4 main components and said those were forbidden, but fractions of those components might be acceptable as a matter of conscience. The reasoning was so convoluted, so obviously man-made rather than divinely inspired. I remembered faces then. Specific faces from my decades of service. Brother Thompson, who died in 1997 after a car accident because he refused blood, leaving behind 4 children under 10 years old. Sister Martinez, who hemorrhaged after childbirth and made the faithful choice, as we called it, and never held her baby girl. I had comforted those families. I had praised their faithfulness at the funerals. I had held up their examples in talks as models of loyalty to Jehovah. And now I was discovering that they died for a policy that was not actually scriptural, that was not actually from God, that was just an interpretation by men in Brooklyn who changed their minds about details every few years. The shunning policy was even worse. The organization taught that cutting off all contact with disfellowshipped family members, even your own children, was a loving provision from God meant to bring them back to their senses. I had enforced this policy strictly. I had given talks about not even greeting disfellowshipped ones, not eating with them, not having any association beyond what was absolutely necessary. I had watched families torn apart and called it divine discipline. But when I studied the scriptures we used to support shunning, I saw how twisted the application was. The passage in 1 Corinthians was talking about not associating with someone claiming to be a Christian brother while practicing serious sin, and it was specifically in the context of the congregation, not family relationships. The scripture in 2 John about not receiving deceivers into your home was about traveling false teachers, not your own daughter who stopped believing the same doctrines you did. We had taken narrow, specific instructions and expanded them into a weapon of control that destroyed families. I started making a list. I could not help myself. Every false prophecy, every changed teaching, every failed prediction, I documented it. 1914 was supposed to be Armageddon, not the invisible return of Christ. They changed that after 1914 passed and nothing visible happened. 1925 was supposed to bring the resurrection of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. They even built a mansion in San Diego called Beth Sarim for the ancient faithful ones to live in when they returned. When that failed, they quietly sold the property and stopped talking about it. 1975 was so heavily implied to be the end that hundreds of witnesses sold homes, quit jobs, and postponed education, only to face 1976 with crushing disappointment. The generation teaching had changed so many times I needed a flowchart to track it. The generation that saw 1914 would not pass away before the end came. That was stated as absolute fact for decades. But as that generation died off, the definition of generation kept expanding, morphing, changing to accommodate the failed prediction. Now it meant overlapping generations, an interpretation so stretched and desperate that it would be laughable if it had not controlled millions of lives. I found the United Nations scandal, something I had no idea about because it happened before the internet made information free. The organization that had spent decades calling the United Nations the disgusting thing, the scarlet-colored wild beast of revelation, had secretly registered as an NGO with the UN for nearly 10 years, from 1992 to 2001. When it was exposed, they quietly withdrew and claimed it was just to get access to a library card, an explanation so ridiculous it insulted the intelligence of anyone who examined it. The Australian Royal Commission hearings from 2015 revealed the depth of the child abuse problem. More than 1,000 cases of child sexual abuse within the Australian branch alone, and not one was reported to police. Not one. The elders followed the two-witness rule, requiring 2 witnesses to the abuse before taking action, as if pedophiles assault children in front of audiences. I watched video testimony from the governing body member Jeffrey Jackson, under oath, admitting that disfellowshipping someone for abuse was not mandatory, that it would be presumptuous to say they were the only channel God was using, statements that contradicted everything we taught from the platform. I had spent my entire adult life believing I was part of the one true religion, the only organization God was using, the Ark of Salvation in a dying world. Now I was drowning in evidence that it was just another human institution, filled with flawed men making flawed policies and covering up mistakes and controlling people through fear and manipulation. The weight of it crushed me. I stopped sleeping more than 3 or 4 hours a night. My wife Sarah noticed but attributed it to stress from my elder responsibilities. I had always been the stable one, the rock she leaned on, and now I was coming apart at the seams while pretending everything was fine. The Tuesday and Thursday meetings became torture. I sat on the platform during Watchtower studies, nodding along as brothers commented with answers lifted straight from the paragraph, and inside I was screaming. Every statement about the faithful and discreet slave being God's sole channel, every assertion that we had the truth and everyone else was deceived, every promise that the end was close, it all sounded like propaganda to my newly opened ears. The elder meetings were worse. We discussed judicial cases, families to be torn apart, people to be disfellowshipped for sins that ranged from genuine moral failings to simply disagreeing with organizational teaching. There was a young woman, 23 years old, who had confessed to sleeping with her boyfriend. She was repentant, genuinely broken over it, but the body of elders was divided on whether to disfellowship her or just reprove her. I watched grown men debate the intimate details of this young woman's life, deciding her fate based on arbitrary assessments of her level of repentance, and I wanted to flip the table and walk out. But I said nothing. I was a coward. I voted with the majority to avoid suspicion. I stood up after the meeting and shook hands with the other elders and drove home hating myself. That young woman was disfellowshipped 2 weeks later at a judicial committee I participated in. Her family stopped speaking to her that same night. I saw her at the next meeting sitting alone in the back row, tears streaming down her face through the entire 2 hours, shunned by everyone including her own mother who sat 3 rows ahead and never turned around once. I could not do it anymore. I could not enforce policies I knew were harmful. I could not teach doctrines I knew were false. I could not look people in the eye and tell them this was the truth when I had seen behind the curtain. The gap between who I was pretending to be and who I actually was grew into a chasm that threatened to swallow me whole. I tried dropping hints to Sarah, small questions here and there, hoping she might be open to examining things with me. I mentioned the 607 date over breakfast one Saturday morning, very casually, just noting that historians had different views. She shut it down immediately with the exact response I had given Margaret Henderson weeks earlier. We trust the faithful and discreet slave. We do not rely on worldly wisdom. Satan controls the information in this system of things. Her certainty was absolute, her faith unshakable, and I realized with a sinking heart that I could not bring her with me. Not yet. Maybe not ever. My son-in-law Mark was serving as a ministerial servant in another congregation. My daughter Rachel was a regular pioneer, spending 70 hours a month knocking on doors and conducting Bible studies. My 3 grandchildren were being raised in the truth, as we called it, attending meetings twice a week, going out in field service every Saturday, being taught that their grandfather was an exemplary witness. How could I tell them I was leaving? How could I destroy our family by walking away? The consequences of my exit would reach far beyond me. I met with Brother Patterson, the coordinator of our body of elders, and told him I needed to step down from my responsibilities. I cited health issues and stress, which was not entirely a lie. My blood pressure had skyrocketed over the past 2 months, and I had developed an eye twitch that would not stop. Brother Patterson was concerned, loving in his way, trying to encourage me not to make any rash decisions. He talked about how Satan attacks elders specifically because they are shepherds of the flock. He prayed with me right there in the Kingdom Hall, asking Jehovah to give me strength and wisdom. I felt like a fraud. Here was this sincere man praying for me, and I was lying to him about why I wanted to step down. But I could not tell him the truth. The moment I expressed doubts about the organization, I would be labeled as an apostate. A judicial committee would be formed. They would ask questions designed to determine if I still believed the governing body was God's channel, if I still accepted all the teachings. Any hesitation, any questioning, would result in disfellowshipping. And disfellowshipping meant losing everyone. My wife. My daughter. My grandchildren. Everyone I had spent decades building relationships with in the congregation. The isolation hit me before I had even officially left. I was already alone with my thoughts, unable to share them with anyone who would not immediately report me to the elders. I found online forums where ex-witnesses gathered, and I lurked there for weeks, reading their stories, seeing my own experience reflected back at me hundreds of times over. The pain was universal. The loss was universal. But so was the eventual relief, the freedom, the discovery that life outside was not the barren wasteland we had been taught it would be. I started planning my exit strategy. I needed to get my financial affairs in order because I knew Sarah might leave me once I told her. I needed to document everything in case there was a custody issue with seeing my grandchildren, though I knew that was probably hopeless. I needed to prepare myself mentally for the reality that I was about to lose my entire social structure, everyone I called friend, the only community I had known for 4 decades. The thought terrified me more than I can adequately express. One night I broke down completely. Sarah was already asleep, and I sat in my study with all the lights off, crying so hard I thought I might vomit. 59 years old and I was starting over from scratch. Everything I had believed, every decision I had made, every relationship I had built, all of it was contaminated by the lie I had lived. I had wasted my youth on this organization. I had given them my time, my energy, my money, my complete devotion. I had sacrificed career opportunities to stay spiritually strong. I had avoided making friends with people outside the organization. I had structured my entire existence around meetings and field service and study. And for what? For a beautiful illusion that crumbled the moment I examined it honestly. I wrote the letter on a Tuesday morning in October, exactly 3 months after Margaret Henderson asked me about 607 BCE. The letter was simple, just 2 paragraphs. I stated that I was resigning as an elder effective immediately and that I would no longer be attending meetings. I did not explain why. I did not list my reasons or try to convince anyone. I knew that anything I wrote would be used against me, would be shared with the entire congregation as evidence of my apostasy, would be picked apart and refuted and used as a warning example. So I kept it brief and formal. I hand-delivered the letter to Brother Patterson's house that afternoon. He read it standing in his doorway, his face going from confusion to concern to something like fear. He invited me in. I declined. He asked if we could talk, if I would meet with the body of elders, if he could call the circuit overseer. I told him my decision was final and that I needed him to respect it. He asked about Sarah, about my family. I told him I would handle my family situation. Then I walked back to my car while he stood in his doorway looking like someone had just told him the world was ending. The phone call started within an hour. Every elder in the congregation called me. Brothers I had served with for years, men I genuinely cared about, all of them wanting to know what was wrong, what had happened, how they could help. I gave them all the same answer. I needed to step away for personal reasons and I would appreciate privacy. When they pushed, and they all pushed, I simply said I could not discuss it. The calls became more frequent, more urgent. The circuit overseer got involved. Then a member of the branch committee. They wanted to meet with me. They wanted to help me. They wanted to make sure I was not spreading apostate ideas. I agreed to meet with a judicial committee, not because I wanted to or thought it would change anything, but because refusing would have made things worse for Sarah. The meeting was scheduled for the following Thursday evening at the Kingdom Hall, 7 o'clock, the same time I used to conduct the Henderson family's Bible study. 3 elders sat across from me at a table in the back room. Brother Patterson was one of them. He looked like he had not slept. They asked if I still believed the governing body was the faithful and discreet slave. I said I did not. They asked if I believed the organization had the truth. I said I did not. They asked if I was willing to discuss why and potentially be helped to correct my thinking. I told them I had done months of research and my decision was based on evidence, not emotion, and nothing they said would change my mind. The whole meeting lasted less than 20 minutes. They announced they would make a decision and inform me of the results. I was disfellowshipped the following Tuesday evening. An announcement was made at the service meeting, brief and clinical. Brother William is no longer one of Jehovah's Witnesses. That was it. No explanation. No context. Just the statement that would cause every person in that Kingdom Hall to immediately cut off all association with me. I was not there to hear it. Sarah was. She came home from the meeting and walked straight past me to our bedroom and locked the door. She did not speak to me for 3 days. When she finally did, it was to tell me she was moving in with our daughter Rachel temporarily while she figured out what to do. She said she still loved me but could not be married to an apostate. She said she had to put Jehovah first. She said she was praying I would come to my senses before it was too late. Then she packed 2 suitcases and left. My daughter called me the next morning. She was crying so hard I could barely understand her. She asked how I could do this to the family, how I could throw away everything, how I could turn my back on Jehovah. I tried to explain that I was not turning my back on God, that I still believed in God, that I just could not be part of the organization anymore. She told me that if I was not part of the organization then I was part of Satan's world, and she could not allow that influence around her children. She said she loved me but she could not speak to me again unless I came back. Then she hung up. I did not hear from my son-in-law at all. He blocked my number. My grandchildren, who used to video call me every Sunday after the meeting to tell me what they learned, were suddenly unavailable. Their profiles on social media were set to private. Every photo I appeared in with them was deleted or I was cropped out. It was like I had died, except worse than dying because I was still alive and being erased. The brothers and sisters from the congregation who used to greet me warmly now crossed the street to avoid me. I saw Sister Jenkins at the grocery store, a woman I had known for 15 years, and she literally turned her cart around and went down a different aisle when she spotted me. My phone stopped ringing. My email inbox filled with messages from people removing me from group chats and event invitations. I was effectively dead to everyone I had spent my adult life surrounded by. The depression that followed was darker than anything I had experienced. I understood why so many ex-witnesses contemplated suicide in those first months. You lose everything all at once. Your identity. Your purpose. Your community. Your family. The structure that organized your entire life. And you are left with nothing but the terrible freedom to figure out who you are without the organization defining you. Some days I did not get out of bed. Some days I stood at that railway bridge again, watching the trains, thinking how easy it would be. But something in me refused to give up. Maybe it was pride, not wanting them to have the satisfaction of saying I fell apart without the truth. Maybe it was spite, wanting to prove that life outside was not the misery they prophesied. Maybe it was just the stubborn will to survive that humans possess when pushed to the edge. Whatever it was, I held on. I started therapy with a counselor who specialized in religious trauma. I joined XJW support groups online and eventually attended meetups in person. I discovered there were thousands of us, a whole community of people who had walked away and rebuilt their lives. I was not alone, even though the organization worked very hard to make me feel that way. I learned that the grief I was experiencing was real and valid, that losing your entire social structure was comparable to experiencing multiple deaths all at once, that healing would take years, not weeks or months. Slowly, painfully, I began to build a new life. I made friends outside the organization for the first time in decades. I took up hobbies I had never allowed myself time for. I read books that had been forbidden. I explored philosophies and ideas I had been taught were demonic. I discovered that people outside the organization were not wicked or immoral or empty. They were just people, living their lives, trying to find meaning and happiness like everyone else. Some were more ethical than many witnesses I had known. Some were more loving, more genuine, more honest. Sitting here now, 18 months after I walked away, I can tell you that I do not regret my decision even though it cost me everything. The truth, actual truth, not organizational truth, was worth the price. Living authentically, according to my own conscience and my own understanding, was worth the price. Being free from the constant fear of making a mistake and losing God's approval was worth the price. Not having to enforce harmful policies on vulnerable people was worth the price. But I will not lie to you and say it was easy or that the pain has fully healed. My wife divorced me 6 months ago. The paper cited irreconcilable differences, but we both knew it was because I was disfellowshipped and she could not remain married to me without being viewed suspiciously by the congregation. I have not seen my grandchildren in over a year. My daughter sends me one text message on my birthday each year, just the word, "I love you," and nothing else. That is all the contact we are allowed according to the rules she still follows. The loneliness comes in waves. There are days when I miss the simplicity of having all the answers, of knowing exactly what to believe and what to do and where I fit in the grand scheme of things. There are days when I miss the community, the instant friendships, the sense of purpose that came with being part of something bigger than myself. There are days when I wonder if I should have just kept my mouth shut and stayed for the sake of keeping my family together. But those days are becoming less frequent. The moments of genuine peace, of feeling aligned with my own conscience, of living without cognitive dissonance, those moments are becoming more common. I am becoming whole in a way I never was as a witness, even if that wholeness comes with more questions and less certainty. I am learning to be comfortable with not having all the answers, to be okay with doubt and nuance and complexity. I am discovering that life is richer and more beautiful when you are not viewing it through the narrow lens of organizational doctrine. If you are watching this and you are having doubts, if you are questioning things you have been afraid to question, if you feel that first crack forming in your certainty, I want you to know that you are not crazy and you are not alone. The feelings you are having are valid. The questions you are asking are important. And whatever you decide to do with those questions, whether you stay or leave or something in between, I hope you choose authenticity over comfort, truth over tradition, and your own conscience over the dictates of men who claim to speak for God. The Exodus is silent because they want it to be silent, because acknowledging it would mean acknowledging that something is profoundly wrong. But we are here, thousands and thousands of us, living proof that life exists after the organization, that faith can survive outside the kingdom hall, and that the truth they promised us was not the truth at all. It was just a different kind of cage, beautifully decorated, but a cage nonetheless. Thank you for listening to my story. I hope it helps someone out there who needs to hear it.